presentation will be a process talk and talking about the influences on this piece and what um, helped it to become what it is. So I'm going to start here at the very beginning. You were born just after the flood, right? I was. Where we stand used to be a valley surrounded by mountains, mountains that had been sculpted by God's flood waters. My family was descended from Noah's son Shem. Mine too. My father was a shepherd. Most of my childhood was spent tending his sheep. So when did you know you wanted to be an architect? To pass the time, I'd stack rocks. It was all there was to do. I'd build those towers taller and taller. Little did I know that one day I'd stack the mountains themselves on top of each other. We live in incredible times, Nabal. I laid the first stone 30 years ago today. What a silly aim to build a tower to reach heaven. How strange to step inside my entire life's work. Prepare the lift for Lady Bina and her assistant. Your ladyship, it is my honor to escort you to meet the king. Nabal? Kahil. I didn't recognize you in those expensive robes. I have ached for you all these years, Nabal. I will come to your tent tonight. I better get us moving. Pardon us, Lady Bina. Kahil is a childhood friend who's been serving with the king for several years. Raise us up, boys. Excuse the noise on the way to the roof, my lady. Despite the easier labor, the beasts have grown restless of late. Nabal, don't be afraid. Ah, Lady Bina, you have my thanks. A marvel has been built in my absence. It is all thanks to you, my liege, for you supplied the stone and the workers. Rise, most revered of architects. A moment, your majesty. These old bones are not as limber as they once were. Let it be known to you that I could not have carried out my work without the careful calculations of young Nabal here. You may rise, then. Your Highness, it is truly perfect. From this height I can see for leagues in any direction. Around this tower my people shall unite. I will finally have the advantage I need over my enemies. One brick remains unlaid in preparation for the great feast tomorrow. You will both be in attendance, I'm sure. Of course, my king, we wouldn't miss it. Forgive my silence tonight, Nabal. My heart has grown heavy, realizing that something I've spent my life building will be ultimately used as a tool in Nimrod's wars. But my lady, you have given Nimrod the tool he needs to deliver peace to all the people of Shinar. Oh, Nabal, that was never the reason or the purpose of the tower. There is no reason you should not know why it was built. Years ago, when I was still a young woman with a strong back, my youngest daughter was swallowed by a nearby river's currents. My dear, sweet Farah. My grief was so great that I dammed the river with my own 2 hands. After the dam's completion, my dreams were haunted by visions of a great ladder. There ascending it were all my loved ones. Still grief-struck, I ignored all else and became obsessed with building a great tower that would help me reach those heavens. Nimrod, still only a young chieftain, found me in the midst of my labor, crazed and mad. Not knowing his motivations, I accepted his offers of aid. I was convinced that without the labor he could provide, I'd never see my Farah. But as my grief slowly dulled, it became clear that my tower would never reach heaven. It is merely a tall stone in the desert. My only solace is that a city might one day stand in its shadow. A city full of daughters, daughters who will remain safe within its walls from the wars Nimrod hopes to wage. I was not facetious when I praised you earlier, Nabal. The Tower of Babel would never have been finished without your aid. Nabal, to protect all these people, please help build my city. I will do my best, my lady. Then I can at last rest when I grow so weary. Thank you for sitting with her tonight, Nabal. There was much to prepare for Nimrod's feast tomorrow. Even though Mother's Tower is finished, you'll always be a part of our family. Now, Mama, you can't sleep like that. I've been waiting for you. Why don't you play with the others, son? They play too rough for me, Papa. Nonsense. You will grow one day. Grow up and join the hunt alongside those boys. Wait! Stop it! I'm sorry. What are you building? I'm building a tent, one that will last forever. But won't a rock tent be too heavy to carry? I'd like to stay in one spot for a while. Just like the rest. Ugh. There. You'll need bigger rocks if it's going to last forever. Our army rode to the east, and there were 2 great cities there. Nimrod hand-selected me amongst his soldiers to go inside to stand guard as he treated with their queen. And inside, walking the streets, there were men like us, men who openly kissed each other in the streets, who lived as a husband and wife might, sleeping under one roof. I want that for us. Do you? I do. Then let's leave. During the ceremony tomorrow, we'd escape without notice. Kahil, I can't. I mean, we haven't seen each other in years. How well do we know one another? And Bina wants me to help her build this. We haven't seen each other in years. You're right. God's above, I can't do this anymore. I'll get a horse. We'll leave tomorrow. Hide. Marion, what is it? The sun is still hours from rising. She passed in the night. Honorable lady, when most of us merely aspired to be devoured by the underworld, Sheol, you showed us the way to the heavens. Nabal. Oh, Kahil. Oh, God, I can't. Not now. What are you talking about? This is a stolen horse. Bina's gone, Kahil. Her work is still undone. But Nabal, please. Goodbye, beloved. I've cried too much today. Ah, the young architect. My liege, is there a reason why you do not enjoy the festivities? Even though it is such a momentous day, my king, it is hard to be joyful without Lady Bina here to witness her tower's completion. She was a good servant, but I could see that her star was fading. That is why I was so delighted to see you with her yesterday, Nabal. A vigorous young man who can aid me in carrying out my vision. I am overjoyed that you have refused your lover to continue your work. You You knew about me and Kahil. Indeed. Now let me tell you a story, young architect. When I was a boy, I was captured, taken from my parents, and made a slave to a king in a northern city. My hatred made me a terrible servant, but the king recognized my talent for violent work while butchering hens for his kitchen. He conscripted me into the city's army, and I quickly rose in rank. It was not long before I found myself commanding a battalion of fellow slaves at the behest of our slavers. Realizing this reality was unbearable. So unbearable that I took great action. I opened the doors of the slave quarters, took the chains many of us had worn, wrapped them around the gates, and burned the city to the ground. None of the soldiers under my command could return to the lives they'd had before. We wandered marauding, pillaging cities much like the one I'd left in ashes. That is when I met Bina, a person whose purpose was vast enough to require as many lost souls as I was leading through the desert, and help me become a god rather than a slave. Nabal, I don't care what sodomy you commit or is committed upon you, but if you ever attempt to run away, I will have you dragged back in fetters. My subjects deserve a city that cannot be burned down by the many enemies I've made, and that means having an architect who knows how to build stone walls. Do not worry. In the end, it will all be finally worth it. King Nimrod, the last brick awaits you. Ah, very well. It was so good talking with you, Nabal. Everyone says you like boys. Of course I don't. You don't have to worry. Oh, okay. Nabal, Kahil, with this brick, a new era dawns for the people of Shinar. Kahil! Nabal! Kahil, I was a fool. I love you. What does he say? My God. Genesis 11, 5 through 7. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. One second. Preview never quits expectedly. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other. Kahil! Kahil! I can't understand you. Kahil, what are you? The end. Now we'll transition over to the artist talk and process portion. So I first wanted to start this talk by presenting two quotes by two artists and makers who greatly influenced me, and how they handle their work and how they handle themselves in the world. This first one is by Mobius, which seemed to encapsulate this point I'm at with my life and my work. In the beginning, I had two different levels: to be an artist in comics because it was my dream as a teenager. And when I was 7, 8, 10, I was such a fan, I committed already to drawing. The comics were not stories to enjoy for me, they were drawings that possessed me. The second level for me, another side. The expression of art as something bigger than life, bigger than anything. There was something very mysterious about that and beautiful. It was a kind of heaven with Picasso and everybody at the same table. I wanted to be part of that. For me, it was a feast through the ages, timeless. And that pretty much encapsulated what my experience was at MCAD, starting and being possessed by these drawings and worlds, but opening up and trying to find something beyond just the stories I was trying to tell, trying to make something beyond Batman and Superman, which were the stories that I grew up with. Also, this Maurice Sendak piece, or quote, "Things come to you without you necessarily knowing what they mean." The entire time I was working on Babel, I didn't really know what I was doing. And I was trying to piece together the story, and I was drawing on these wells of ideas, but I didn't quite know what it meant. So this presentation was actually very exciting for me because I got to trace through the path I went down in order to create this piece. So why did I make a gay comic about the Bible? So featured here are the two books I remember most from when I was a child. This first one is a team up of Batman with the Jack Kirby character Kamandi, where like Kamandi gets conscripted by the mafia, and it's just like super bizarre. And that was by Jim Aparo and Jerry Serp. And on the right is the Children's Bible in 365 stories, which I think has been reprinted countless times in a ridiculous amount of printings and languages. And that was done by an illustrator named John Haysom, who did a lot of Christian-based work through the 90s, and I think now works as a fine artist painting flowers. So these were the two visual languages I had growing up. These were the two things I understand the most. My worldview was very much shaped by Batman and the Bible. And that was how I fundamentally understood the world, and that was the visual languages that I spoke more than animation or film or any other kind of storytelling language. And those were the ones that captivated me. This is actually the first splash page from the book, which I remember more because our copy that was lying around the house had the cover ripped off. So I'd never actually seen this cover until last week, which was just a very surreal experience. I had to track down the issue number. And this is actually the illustration done to accompany the page from the Tower of Babel by John Haysom. So these were, how I understood the world through superheroes and the Bible. And eventually, coming out when I was 19, one of these worlds seemed to be able to evolve with me and take the strain of what I was doing. This is a picture of me when I was 4, dressed as Batman, and this is the Presbyterian church where I grew up in and is still home to me. But one of these worldviews I was able to broaden myself and come to an understanding with pretty easily. These are an example of 2 LGBT works. Stuck Rubber Baby, which is about the influence of gay figures within the civil rights era. And this is Fun Home, a longer graphic novel about a lesbian woman cartoonist relationship with her father who was gay. And these were exciting works to me. They helped me understand myself. They helped me understand this world. They opened new avenues with comics. The religious aspect of my life was harder to come to terms with. These are screenshots of the 2 Bible verses I remember reading constantly from the ages of 16 to 18 that were very hard for me to come to terms with and deal with. The first one, the Leviticus one, I was pretty easily able to, I came to terms with the fact that Leviticus was an older book of the Bible. It was biblical law in the New Testament. Some of these, things could be rectified through a relationship with Jesus Christ, but this Romans verse troubled me deeply. 26, because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. And this was a hard passage for me because it felt as if, because I was having these feelings, these homosexual feelings, that God was abandoning me over to this shame. And eventually now, as a fully developed human, I'm able to read this and I'm able to come to terms with this. And I understand why this was written and understand within the context of the church why this was a verse that was written. It was used to attack the Romans from this small group of dissidents who were fairly accepting for their time of homosexuality. But because of this, as I was going and looking towards making Babel, it started becoming apparent, what my influences were going forward. This is a piece by Paula Sane that was done as concept art for the film The Prince of Egypt, which was a very exciting work for me. I saw it my freshman year with my friends, rediscovered it. I think I watched it a little bit as a kid. My neighbors across the street were really into it. But this work was exciting to me because it was a biblical story that was not for the mere purpose of conversion. It was about telling this story again in a way that was very exciting and fresh and wasn't preachy. And it opened a lot of avenues for me as a storyteller, like what I could possibly achieve through this work that I was doing. Also of influences were the work of Tom Gauld, who did this selection from Kramer's Ergot 7, which was about the book of Noah, or not the book of Noah, the story of Noah, and the construction of the ark and how it was going to happen. This page is huge. It's I think about 24 by 36, if I'm about right. And I have gone to the library multiple times just to read this story, even though the whole book is beautiful. I've found myself just reading this story, closing the book, and putting it back on the shelf. Another example of a work that was biblical in nature, used biblical imagery, but was telling a very personal story. This is a page from Eleanor Davis's How to Be Happy. These are, in the story, Eleanor is riding on a bus from one place to the other, and it's a series of very human experiences and then she looks out the window and she sees the hands of God, either as a metaphor or as a real thing or as a hallucination. This was just a very exciting image for me because it helped me cement in my mind the epic nature of this work that I wanted to make, the ideas that I was hoping to encapsulate, and just a high bar to reach. And then I just wanted to acknowledge the influence of my peers and contemporaries. Maja Pandilla is an incredible cartoonist who graduated from SVA a few years ago, and the tone of her work is something that I'm always trying to achieve, always something I'm shooting for. She's just incredible, and this is a selection from Tom Herpick's White Clay. Tom Herpick is a really incredible cartoonist, and whenever I sit down, I'm always trying to draw like him, even though, eventually I just forget that because then I'm just drawing. But the way he makes marks and lines and mood and emotion is always just very exciting to me. Then, as far as mentorship, I sought two people specifically to help me through the process of this book. The first was Anders Nilsson, who I interned with last semester and really helped me just iron out what I wanted to do. He's been an incredible artist and maker here in the cities, and the way he makes comics was really exciting to me because, first of all, the big thing that influenced Babel is that there's no panel borders in a lot of his work, which in Babel there is like kind of a lineless panel border throughout much of the book. But that idea that the figures could escape a border and how time works differently without a panel border was very interesting to me. So he helped me out a lot. I also briefly was talking with Jeremy Cerise. This is a page from his graphic novel Curveball that just came out. And I sought his mentorship just because he was another gay man making work about LGBT queer people, and trying to be very real. The second half of Babel wouldn't be what it is without his notes and insight. He was also raised, and he was intending on becoming a preacher through much of his childhood. So it was nice to also have that like biblically grounded perspective that I needed to hear from. Then moving forward, this is all going to be just about the actual physical process of drawing this book. These were my original thumbnails for the book. It was going to be a handout zine that I was going to give to people at Autoptic who I really liked. It was going to be like 24 little pages drawn in square grids. But I eventually realized, A, it was going to be a lot of work to do in 1 week. And I wasn't going to be able to do it. Also, I realized I wanted to do it really well. And this story was starting to have a profound effect on me. And this was 3 years ago now, when I first started laying this out. And it was very bad. It was going to be this like Arthur C. Clarke like man reaching beyond his potential and being thrust evolutionarily like beyond what it could handle. It was going to be garbage. So I'm very glad I didn't hand that out to everyone I respected at Autoptic 3 years ago. Sometimes things work out for the best. But I found as I was working on this story, it didn't come in one go. It was a lot of notes. It was a lot of me just writing the word Babel in my sketchbook for 2 years, just like over and over again. There's several more examples of me just writing Babel. But eventually it started to like come together, and these were just these two images of God appearing and God breaking the tower were the final two images that really coalesced what I wanted to do. Also, I just put this image in here because I was really excited that at one point I wanted to write a stealing zine, which I have no clue what have happened in stealing zine or temptation zine. Yeah. then it was a matter of finding the visual style that I felt would work for the book, because my work tends to organically evolve to whatever project is needed. That meant I had to really find something that was going to work for what I imagined was going to be 40 pages and ended up being 80. So this was a digital study I did of the Libyan Sibyl from Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. Occasionally when I'm starting these kinds of projects, I'll try to copy images that are similar to what I'm hoping to convey through my work. And copying this image really helped me get down the visual style I wanted. The blue, the orange, the, textured line work, but it's fairly minimal. It's not a very heavy line by any means, or any heavy rendering. And this helped me move forward into going into the research phase, which was really important for me, that I created a world that was at once fantasy, like Babel probably didn't exist as we conceptualized it now. So it required, and there's no like culture that is directly citable for the purposes of the book. So I went to the library and I got a stack about 1.5 feet high of Akkadian art books and Mesopotamian art books and Babylonian art books, which are all thick and they don't tend to have as many pictures as you'd like. Flipping through, trying to find visual reference that I thought would work for the book. And a lot of this didn't end up like going into the book, like that circle thing. I was looking at that the last night and I was like, oh, I should have put in that like circle with the like lightning bolts coming out of it. But often it's good to just develop a solid bedrock of just like visual influences to draw on as you're moving forward in a project, just so you aren't like reaching like, oh, how should I draw this edging on a building? I have no clue because I didn't do any research. And then these were the first character designs. On the left for the characters in the book, Cahill's hair went through a lot of weird revisions. Nabal's look was pretty solid, although I think he had a nose ring at first that I probably didn't draw because it would have meant I had to draw it throughout the entire book. Bina's character, I think I had a pretty good grasp on how I wanted her overall shape to be from the very beginning. And then here are the character designs I went with as I was drawing and coloring the book. Everyone's a little bit more orange than they ended up being. That was a process of figuring out, oh, orange skin colors do look weird when you put them against a naturalistic landscape. But then this is the sketchbook I worked from the entirety of Babel. It has stickers from Anna Hinojosa on it. And I decided to use a sketchbook just because I wanted my work all in one place, and I wanted something that felt like a living document that I could alter in a nice way as I was going through. And then here's an example of the timesheet I used to keep myself on track through the process. And as I was to finish off a panel, I'd highlighter off, which part of the page I just completed. Then here are what the actual sketchbook pages look like before they're dropped into the computer. Sometimes there's weird faces that come out from the excess ink that's like running off of your brush and ruining your drawing. Sometimes there's weird little notes that don't make any sense to me anymore. I don't know why that pillar is named Kelsey. And then there was also the process of, I was originally lettering the comic in my sketchbook, and I realized that ultimately wasn't going to be a very fulfilling process, and I ended up lettering most of it digitally. But at the start, and for select portions that needed handed lettering, that was also in the book. And there's also drawings that just didn't work, and so they weren't completed, like the last one there. These mountains are a little rough. And then here's an example of what, those blacks or those solid blue clouds look like in the actual book. And so this was a process for me of coming to terms with all aspects of my life that I'd had to struggle with and wrestle with through my time at MCAD. It was a struggle with my self-concept of being a gay man. It was a struggle with religion, and something, by the end of the book, I had because I'd been sitting and staring at it for, oh gosh, I don't even want to think about how many hours I've spent drawing this comic. But by the end of it, I had a pretty, where I was pretty set. It was also just an opportunity for me to struggle with comics and figure out what I wanted to do with comics and where I needed to go with my work next. So these are some examples of the thumbnails to the finished pages. These were done digitally when the book was originally going to be 24 pages before 80 pages. And when it was going to be a pitch for a very specific publisher. And some of these, they stayed pretty true. This first page, like that was pretty one-to-one. There was originally buildings, but then I thought it was cooler if everyone was living in tents. Made the tower seem a little more impressive. And then some pages, had to be split in two. Like this page, I think this is actually split into three because that last panel doesn't quite happen for a few more panels. And that was a really exciting process to go through. When I was looking through and I had my sketchbook out and I was redrawing my thumbnails, it was like, oh, I can make this way longer than I originally intended, but it's going to be more work. But hey, I'll figure that out later when I'm rushing against a deadline that seemed impossible. And then here's a page from the funeral, and that was an important scene for me to try and capture with color tonally. Here's an example of how the party scene originally looked. There was originally going to be like torches sticking out of the wooden like frames, and I realized at a certain point, oh, that'd be a terrible idea. They burned that tower right down after just finishing it. And then this is one of the few instances where I actually took a single image that I really wanted to do. This was originally going to be a double page spread in the book, but because of the way I was working with the scroll and with the individual pages, I realized I couldn't just make it a double page spread. It couldn't be wide. So I then realized the way to widen the time was to stack two images on top of each other and have the building being torn apart that way. And so here's just the dedication portion and the thanks for all my friends and family who've gotten me along this way. This book I tend to dedicate each of my books to someone, and this one is dedicated to Donald Notaboom, my grandfather who passed away during my time at MCAD, who was a very loving and supportive presence in my life. And even though I think I'd come out to about nearly everyone by that point, I hadn't come out to my grandfather before he passed away. And I don't know how he would have reacted to that or how he would have, been able to handle that. But I know if I would have showed him this book, he would have had a lot of questions. He would have questioned my biblical scholarship. He would have asked me about my choice of wording, and if I'd use the word gray. And his love definitely lives on through many of these pages. And I wore his clothing during the production of this book and felt his love around me. Also, I wanted to say special thanks to my friends and peers who've gotten me where I am today. Maddie Gonzalez, Rosemary Valero O'Connell, Madeline McGrain, Fu Yang, Kathy Chavers, who's a friend in New York, and Grace Easton, as well as my mentors, Barbara Scholes, Anders Nielsen, Jeremy Cerise, Robert Algio, and Julie Van Grol, as well as my family. I always love putting this picture up, especially the one in the top middle, because so much like my parents. Thank you.